Welcome and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out on this rainy evening. It's so nice to see all of you and to see so many familiar faces. We appreciate you being here. I'm Stacy Brennan. I'm the Curator of Education for Lehigh University Art Galleries. It's an honor to have the opportunity to welcome all of you and to introduce our speakers this evening. We have an exciting event planned where we will soon hear from two of the talented artists, Alteronce Gumby and Wilmer Wilson IV, whose work is featured in the current exhibition, Young, Gifted, and Black, which is currently on view in our main galleries. They will then be followed by a discussion with writer and curator Denny Mwaura. Sorry, my tongue is getting a hold of me. This spring, we are fortunate to host the exhibition Young, Gifted, and Black from the Lumpkin Bacuzzi Family Collection of Contemporary Art. It's curated by Antoine Sargent and Matt Wyckoff. With over 40 contemporary artworks made in the last 35 years, the exhibition Young, Gifted, and Black arrives at a moment of unprecedented visibility for Black artists who have historically been underrepresented in museums and major collections. The exhibition showcases works in a variety of mediums by emerging artists of African descent, alongside works by established artists who have paved the way for the younger generation. On behalf of our team at LUAG and Lehigh University, I want to thank the collectors, Bernard Lumpkin and Carmine Bacuzzi, for sharing this beautiful collection with us and for being with us today. In conjunction with the exhibition, we are offering a variety of lectures, hands-on workshops, and experiences. We hope you will join us for these programs, including a public reception after this event today and a celebration. I would like to thank our partners in the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity and the Africana Studies program here at Lehigh for co-sponsoring the exhibition and related programming. I would also like to thank my amazing colleagues in the art galleries for making all of this possible. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be available after tonight if you'd like to rewatch it. Special thanks to WordStream Captioning up front for being here this evening to provide cart captioning for our audience. And now it's my great honor to introduce our talented speakers this evening. I'd like to thank them in advance for being here and for sharing with us this evening. Each of the artists will give a short presentation and will then sit and chat with Denny to further explore their work. After that, we will offer a few minutes for Q&A with the audience, followed by a reception next door in LUAG's main galleries starting at 7 p.m. Alteronce Gumby is an abstract artist working across multiple mediums and disciplines. He is currently based in New York City and recently graduated from Yale University with an MFA in painting and printmaking. He received his BFA from Hunter College in New York. He completed a year-long residency at the Harriet Hale Woolley Scholar at the Fondation des Etats-Unis in Paris, France. He was granted the AAF Seebacher Prize for the Fine Arts, as well as the Dumfries House Residency, Ayrshire, Scotland, in 2015. Gumby has recently been featured in solo exhibitions, both nationally and internationally. He was just returned from a trip to Mexico, where he debuted a never-before-seen series of artworks with Berlin's Bode Projects at Mexico City Art Fair Zona Maco. Denny Mwaura is an artist, art historian, curator, and writer whose practice focuses on public art, photography, and time-based media. He received his MA in Modern and Contemporary Art History from the School of Art Institute of Chicago. His curatorial research and writing has supported numerous exhibitions and public programs, including Young, Gifted, and Black. Recently, Mwaura was the 2021 recipient of the Schiff Foundation Fellowship for Critical Architectural Writing, an award granted by the Department of Architecture and Design at the Art Institute of Chicago. Wilmer Wilson IV was born in Richmond, Virginia, and is currently based in Philadelphia and New York. Wilson IV holds a BFA from Howard University and an MFA from the University of Pennsylvania. He has been part of exhibitions and performances at the Hammer Museum, Philadelphia Museum of Art, New Orleans Museum of Art, the New Museum Triennial, Barnes Foundation, Flanders Portrait Gallery, and his work can be found in permanent collections at the Baltimore Museum of Art, Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, Bentonville, and the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, among others. thank you again. It's my pleasure now to turn the microphone over to Alteronce Gumby, who is going to take it from here, and then he'll turn it over to Wilmer. So thank you so much, and enjoy the show.
Bonjour à tous. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight on this rainy afternoon. Thank you to the Lumpkin and Bokuzi family. Thank you to Lehigh University, and to Wilmer and Benny for being here with me tonight. I am from Pennsylvania. I'm from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, born and raised. I moved to New York in 2006, and what prompted that move is that I wasn't really, the way I came into knowing that I wanted to be an artist was kind of, oh, there you go. The way I came in and wanted to know I wanted to be an artist is that my first, I guess, major in college in Harrisburg, at Harrisburg Area Community College, was architecture. And I was really interested in space and design, and actually did a study abroad to Spain, and we landed in Barcelona. And day one of being in Barcelona, I went to the Picasso Museum, and that was the first time I actually stepped foot inside of an art gallery or art museum and actually saw the work of Picasso or any artist for that matter. It wasn't really introduced, art wasn't introduced to me when I was a kid, or it wasn't offered to me in high school. I was in a vocational education program. So from that experience of seeing Picasso, it was really life-changing. I feel like I had an artist's awakening, and it led me to pretty much drop out of architecture school because I was horrible at math, and moved to New York to pursue a music career, which then, still having reflections of Picasso in Spain, decided to go back to school and pursue an art career, which led me to speaking here tonight in front of you. I'll start with the work in the gallery, which the image on the screen doesn't really do it justice. I really enjoy making work that needs to be experienced in person. I guess the first time I was really introduced to abstract painting was when I went and saw a abstract expressionist exhibition at the MoMA, and was really in love with the scale and physicality and gestures of Rothko, of Pollock, Guston before the Red Guston, de Kooning, and abstract expressionists. And this painting, Gumby Nation, which is in the exhibition, is a painting that I made my first year in graduate school. And I was really trying to explore, kind of undo some of the things and techniques that I've been learning in undergraduate, kind of put myself in a difficult situation, even though at the time in undergraduate I was really in love with abstract painting, but I wanted to try my hand at some elements of figuration, and also maybe speak a little bit about identity within my work, which is something I was kind of neglecting through undergrad school. So the idea behind this painting is that I was thinking about, who I am as an individual, who is Alteronce Gumby and how does that come out in the work. I started, thinking about my name, my family name, which is Gumby, which really we can't, trace it back to its roots in Africa because of transatlantic slave trade. But I came across, this claymation cartoon character from the 60s and 70s, which was always referenced to me when I was a kid growing up. He's not of my generation. I was born in the 80s, and I was more used to G.I. Joe and Power Rangers. But researching this claymation cartoon character Gumby, and really thinking about, who he is and how he was kind of navigating through his world, and the way he would kind of, travel through these books and interact with history. And, that was kind of his superpower, and use his imagination. Him and his kooky friends, they were kind of like the colored kids on the block. They were all these aliens surrounded and interacting with, kind of like middle-class white people. Kind of reminded me of my experience of being in art school. And so I made this painting kind of thinking about this fictional history of where my roots would have come from back in Africa, and kind of thinking about a tribe or a place in the diaspora that's history of thinkers and innovators and artists that might have gotten lost through whitewashing or through art history. So I made this painting of a group of figures, kind of these silhouette Gumby figures, kind of using this very dark tonal palette to kind of draw the viewer in to consider things that are seen and could be touched, but maybe some way still faded through time. I made a number of Gumby paintings during that time, and actually I loved a part of that research watching SNL skits of Eddie Murphy play Gumby, which I thought was hilarious because he was a black man dressed up as this cartoon character who had a really thick like Polish accent, which the combination of all those things just really boggled me, and yeah, I liked it. Through that time, I was really thinking about art history in depth and really trying to pull on things. I loved the work of Basquiat. One day I went to the Beinecke Library at Yale and just asked them, give me everything you have on Basquiat. I really wanted to see his notebook. They actually have one of his high school journals there. And at the same time, they pulled out this poster. And what really struck me about it is the date under Basquiat's name, which is October 19th, 1985, which is actually my birth date. And so I made this painting kind of speaking to that moment in time of my arrival, kind of ready to take on the world. I should mention that these paintings are actually made from plastiline clay. So I was actually taking the material that made Gumby and actually melting it down in the crock pots and pouring it onto the canvas and kind of spreading it with my hand to kind of make these images. And that's also what the work in the gallery is made of. I was really into playing with these kind of alternative mediums in terms of thinking about art making, thinking about how the physicality of paint or gesture and objects, they all hold this type of meaning behind the work. And I thought, really thinking about, of course, Picasso and his assemblages, Rauschenberg and his collages, Kurt Schwitter's The Situationists, Mark Bradford, Sam Gilliam, the list goes on and on. This is a work I think that I really started kind of thinking about the palette within this material and really coming back to the sensibility of abstraction and what color means within society, thinking about the color codes that we have within society and the way we as human beings kind of have defined color. And so I kind of laid out this palette, which is almost acts as a signage. It's actually a piece that would hang about 7 feet high, and it's called Colors Only. So during my intermission summer between my first year and second year, grad school, I went to travel through Europe to my first Venice Biennale. Thank you to Bernard for his patronage in sponsoring that. And I saw a satellite exhibition of Korean painters, monochromatic Korean painters called Dasekwa. And I really loved the way they, and their approach to painting, or at least their approach to color. They really approach color and painting with this kind of spiritual aspect, and it's focused on the materiality of color. And I was kind of smitten by that because I'd never heard of them throughout my entire art education. So I started realizing that there was maybe some empty holes missing within my education. So, when I got back to Yale, I immediately started researching, the history of monochromatic painting, and came across this image by Paul Belot, which the caption underneath in French is translated to "Negroes fighting in a tunnel at night." And this piece is from like 1886. And I was really, of course, taken by, the racial connotation behind it, but also really, mesmerized by how this simple square could actually sum up so many things through color, through this kind of cinematic format, the way art can kind of, paint a picture, really activate the imagination, just through the simplest gestures. And I really felt like this is the first time that I felt like activated as an artist to really like intersect and have a conversation within this history of monochromatic painting, but also the way color is interpreted and defined throughout society. These color codes, these social structures that were kind of used within it. I felt like it was another form of psychological warfare. And so I felt like this was kind of a project I wanted to take on. So when I got back to Yale, I think the first painting I made was this one, which is still with plastiline clay and a little bit of acrylic, I believe. It's called My President's Black, but my painting's still blue. And it was kind of making commentary towards what was happening at the time, especially during police brutality and Black Lives Matter movement, the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement. So at this point, I started realizing that plastiline clay had its limitations in terms of palette. So I actually switched to oil paint. And it was actually the first time I actually started working with oil paint. Throughout undergrad, it was always acrylic paint, just because I like to work fast. But I really wanted this intricacy and nuance of a palette that I couldn't get from the plastiline clay. At one point, I was actually putting oil bars in the crock pot, trying to tint the plastiline clay. I don't recommend that. It gets really fumy. But but at the time, because I was so used to painting with my hands, I didn't want to give that up because I felt like there was this tactileness that I really enjoyed, this intimacy with the material that I really enjoyed. I played the guitar a little bit and the trumpet in high school, so I felt like there was something about this bodily interaction with the material that allowed me to kind of play these melodies within the painting. So I continue to make these paintings sans brush, without a brush, and so in some of these paintings you're actually seeing they're finger paintings, but there are also certain aspects where I'm actually carving away layers of paint with my fingernails. I really enjoyed kind of playing with the nuances of color. I think from thinking about the history of monochromatic painting, I kind of wanted to get to a more nuanced approach to color, so I started calling my work tonal paintings around this time, thinking about the atmosphere or and energy that you can kind of conjure through color. After I graduated, I did a residency in London at the London Summer Intensive for about a month. They gave us, they kind of gave me this corner to work in, and I started out making drawings, and I always loved the Red Studio painting by Matisse that hangs in a MoMA. And just thinking about how the painting, you can almost kind of you can step inside that painting. Even his water lily paintings, if you've ever been to Paris, it's not at the d'Orsay or the Orléans. The way the paintings kind of just engulf you is something that I've always wanted. I just always wanted to be inside my paintings and be inside that world and have it, kind of take me to another place. So I made this piece kind of, thinking about that. It actually started out as just a drawing on the wall. And then before I knew it, I think I went to the art store 4 times that week and just kept getting more and more paper. And some of the other residents were a little worried that I might spill over into their section. So they asked me to stop once I got to the skylight. When I came back, I loved that work so much that when I came back, I did another installation at Six Base in the Bronx, kind of continuing on that theme of just, wanting to be immersed in the work and kind of live in the painting. This is another installation I did when I was artist in residence at the Fondation des Etats-Unis. And this is actually my live workspace, so it was kind of crazy because I actually had to wake up to this every day. And this is actually paper that I was kind of salvaging from old subway advertisements in Paris. Actually became friends with the guy who actually changes the advertisements on the subway platform. And I asked him if I could borrow, if I could have some of the discarded stuff, and he gave me this massive roll one day that I had to drag home, which was really crazy. But then, so I used up as much as I could to then, cover my studio space when I was done, and I painted it predominantly blue. And what's left over is what you're seeing on the table there. To this day, I'm still mad I didn't take that toilet paper roll away. It's like, or the paper towel roll. It's like, the picture would be so much better if it wasn't there, right? During that time, when I was in Paris, I was binge watching a lot of Neil deGrasse Tyson, A Space-Time Odyssey. And I've always had this fascination with the cosmos. If you were to ask me, what do I want to be when I grow up, when I was, Felix's age, which is 8 or 9, I probably would have told you I wanted to be an astronaut, to go into outer space. But again, I was not good at math, so that kind of killed that dream. But I figured through my work, I can allow my imagination to travel to these distant places, these spaces that we know exist through science, but that we as human beings haven't been yet. And hopefully, with the James Webb Telescope, we can actually start to see in more detail more of these spaces. But it was great watching the show because I got a history lesson on kind of where color comes from. And thinking about the experiment of Sir Isaac Newton and how he discovered the spectra of our star, which we refer to as the rainbow, but also how with all the hundreds of billion stars in the galaxy, that they all also have their own color code. They all have their own unique rainbow, which to me just kind of opens up my palette of imagination in terms of where color comes from and what colors I could see, look like, or even form, out in the universe. And so I started really starting predominantly with the color black, because I still had this tiff with, Paul Billot and other artists, throughout contemporary abstraction who kind of reference the color black as a void or vacuum. So while I was in Paris, I started making these series of paintings, which I refer to as my black paintings, but I never used black straight out of the tube. It was always a mixology of blues, greens, umbers, and violets kind of mixed down into these really dark palettes. And then I kind of set them next to each other so that you can kind of see the nuances of the color. So maybe at a distance, they may read as a black painting, but once you get up close, things really open up in a much more interesting way. I'm going to speed through these pieces real quick. I'm still painting with my hands. These are oil paintings. And I'm starting to think about the history of shape painting as well throughout this. So looking at these Tetris-like shape canvases, which eventually evolved to me kind of making my own shape, which is this one, which I refer to as the Moonwalker. And I referenced this piece, this shape, kind of as like my spaceship of the imagination. It's a shape that I found trying to find another shape, and I've just kind of been running with it ever since. This is a piece that I made in undergraduate at Hunter College, which I thought was funny because in some ways I came from this idea to the painting you saw previously. So it's always just say, if there's any students here, like, you just keep searching, because eventually you'll resolve certain ideas. This is ceramics. Eventually I got to the point where I was still thinking about light and material, and found myself walking down the street one day and coming across a broken bus stop pavilion, and was really thinking about that moment with Sir Isaac Newton, and seeing flickers of rainbows kind of come through the material. So I brought a bucket of it back to my studio and actually started painting with it. Eventually thinking of the work of Jack Whitten, which this painting is dedicated to, and kind of just developing it into a body of work, which is now a material that I use quite often. I skipped this video for the sake of time. This is a recent show that I had at Charles Moffat Gallery, where within the glass I actually started incorporating elements of gemstones and thinking about where color comes from in materials, and yeah, I'll probably speak to that more during the talk if we have time. Thank you.
Give me 1 second as I organize my thing here. Okay. So I have some notes that I'm going to read from too, just to keep my scattered thoughts corralled a little bit. So I've been trying to think of like a a summary of my practice, which I have always struggled to do. But if I had to boil it down, I might say something like, I like to gather together large amounts of small things, and then once that collection starts to cross a line of becoming one big thing, I then have that new thing interact with other things. The work that I do is heavily materially based, and it happens not just with objects, but among objects. I have a lot of questions around the criteria for who can exist as a human being, historically and into the present. A lot of my creative gesturing stems from this reality that the category of the human sort of remains an active battleground, the border of which is used to devalue the lives of many people. I think of my work as a disposition or an orientation that spans across multiple media, but generally I want to see what happens when I engage with the reality that I am an object, and conversely, I want to treat objects as if they have a life of their own. It's been my thought that the compositional techniques that I use could potentially draw out like subaltern meanings from things considered to be lacking value or meaning. The things that compose or sort of line the outskirts of everyday life. And yeah, I want to convey that the implications of drawing out the worth of these things is vast. It seems vast enough to transform our everyday experiences of social and political space. I feel strongly that, valuing worthless things has a potential to be sort of transformative or, dramatically shifting of the way that we relate to ourselves and to others. The way that I've tried to do that, the way that I've tried to create value in things that are worthless or deemed worthless is by gathering them together. Gathering them together until they turn into something new, until they turn into a new form or take on a new organ-like quality that can then augment another object. And since nearly the beginning of my work, I've thought of these groupings of things as second skins, or I've been focused in particular on the organ of the skin, making the organ of the skin out of these things that I gather. This has happened in my work across multiple media, but I'm just going to focus on the performance and sculpture aspects of it in this sort of brief summary of the things that I've tried to do. So this is a piece, it looks like the title is cut off a little bit, called Henry Box Brown Forever. Those are US postage stamps that are covering my entire body. I came through performance
Wonderful. Thank you both for such a wonderful presentation. So I'll start off with Wilmer. We just saw a bunch of works where you're thinking about the way blackness is and has been historically negated. I mean, some of your theoretical foundations can be tied to Fanon's idea of like black people or blackness being the phobic object. And so I'm thinking about the ways that you've deployed repetition to assess the way skin, which is the largest organ on the body, is this material where any kind of cultural sign can be ascribed on or inscribed on specifically. And so I'm curious to know how you came to performance and the ways that skin has been used to govern racial difference and classifications throughout your practice.
Yeah, I've found myself becoming more and more skeptical or sort of critical of the notion of the human over time. And that's taken a lot of different forms, and yeah, I think that is primarily driven by the very clear ways that black people have been like excluded discursively and like physically from the category of the human since its inception, essentially in the West. So that manifests in places like the skin, or in a sort of visual language of the human as well, right? So skin, as we understand humans to have it, like looks a specific way. And as people like Fanon make clear, black people have always had their skin be recognized or be sort of assessed as a thing that is like outside of that. It's a sort of immediate sort of visual barrier to a sort of relationality of humans has been historically. So yeah, I like it felt generative to me like to start thinking about like what skin would look like in a non-human context, in the non-human context of my life, or like what skin could mean if it is detached from a sort of human visuality. And that was happening primarily, or initially through photography. But yeah, the sort of process of constructing these skins in and of itself, and the process of existing in the skin feels like a sort of important next step of like that kind of research, or that kind of like applied research, I guess.
Yeah.
So it feels like it's mixed up in a non-human for me.
Yeah. I mean, you point to the ways that race in itself is something that is constructed purely by vision, and I think about the ways that skin also registers sensorial sensations or sensorial affects or impressions from from the environment. And I think about, when you were showing the works where you are stamped, I'm curious to know how do you feel more embodied or disembodied? Like thinking about the audience interaction, like you are the spectacle. Like I'm curious to hear your thoughts and how embodied you are in those moments when you're performing in public, especially in a place that is so significant like Washington, D.C. Like I also see your body as very monumental as well too, like you're moving around these spaces, and so I wonder how audiences interacted with your own body, what you also felt as well too, like what kind of affect was produced as you were doing these performances.
that is enabled by covering my entire body too. So there's kind of simultaneous like making a spectacle, but also like a protection or like a removal from view. And that feels like psychically useful to me, and maybe sort of I find myself looking for ways to like give other bodies a reprieve from the visual, or like a reprieve from being perceived, which is maybe a sort of paradoxical thing to be doing in visual art. Since it is, there's something visual about what I'm doing, but as with in the staple works too, there's a kind of like relieving of the duty of like showing up all the time that I hope is like enacted through the staple. There's a kind of removal of information and a sort of labor that is required of a viewer in order to access information. I feel like I also especially in performance, I've come to feel over time that like my performances are for objects. They're with objects, they're also for objects. The audience of my performance, I want the audience to be objects.
Okay.
The performance is a performance for objects. So it feels kind of liberatory in the moment of performance to recognize certain audience members who are sort of demanding that I like show up as a human, because that is like already not possible in a lot of ways, and I hope that the sort of conceptual functioning of the elements of the performance are speaking to an audience of objects.
It's interesting to think about the audience as objects, because you're also dealing with objects.
Absolutely.
And you're an object among objects. That's a very interesting view. I didn't think about it until now. So you also deal with skin color in different ways. We saw the painting that's called I'm Not Red, I'm OJ. And it feels like me that is a signifier of what it means to be black, and also define what it actually is to be black. To have, or to be defined as black, it's a funny definition, because our skin color isn't black. We are of different tones. And so I'm curious to hear how you came to use the N and Z shapes and your arrival to them, but also how you think about the spectrum and depth of skin color in your work, if that is something that is of relevance to you.
Okay, the shapes that you're referring to is what I refer to as the Moonwalkers. Yeah, and I came upon that shape when I returned from Paris, and I was getting ready for this exhibition at Long Gallery, and I was kind of using this like Tetris motif of shapes, the four squares, to kind of make up a shape painting, thinking a lot about Ellsworth Kelly or Mary Hausman, all of these shape painters who I've kind of studied and adored throughout my education, and really just wanted to be a part of that conversation. So I found myself in my studio one day trying to make this really large Tetris-shaped painting. And I kind of mended these four squares together and on the ground, and then when I lifted the painting up to sit on the wall, it didn't sit the way I wanted it to, because at an angle, the painting sat about 9.5 feet off the ground. My ceilings were 10 feet at the time, so there was no way that the painting was going to sit upright the way I wanted it to. So it's kind of this happy accident that kind of just happened, where I stepped back and saw this shape in front of me, and was kind of just mesmerized by it. It seemed like it was kind of defying gravity in some way, like it was ascending or descending from somewhere, and it reminded me of the first time I saw Michael Jackson do the moonwalk, where I thought he was like a magician at first, because he was just...
I mean, he was.
Right. It was like, he was just like sliding around, and he like had a glove and everything, and,
Right.
and there was like pyro everywhere, and I was like... so it kind of reminded me of, the first time I saw him do the moonwalk, and I couldn't describe or understand how he was doing what he was doing at the time. It took me sliding across my kitchen floor in like socks to, even get the effect.
Yeah.
But it wasn't as smooth as him. So, but I kind of related that moment of like, not really fully understanding something to kind of discovering the shape. And my relationship with, I guess, color and skin color, it kind of goes back to this moment where I was in a kindergarten and or first grade, maybe it was first grade, and I remember the teacher asking everyone to stand up and say, what their favorite color is and why. And I stood up and said, my favorite color is black. And before I could say why, another student said, oh, you're only saying your favorite color is black is because you're black. And I was like, no, it's not. It's because my favorite superhero is Batman. So, but at the moment, like, I wasn't really, correlating, like, my skin color to...
Right.
Race, because, I was like, if people are saying I'm black, my pants are black. Like, obviously, there's a huge contrast between the two, logically, to me as a kid. So but that memory kind of came back to me when I saw the work of Paul Below, and, started thinking about how, we in society have kind of used color to, we kind of weaponized it. And we gave color this agenda, these definitions, these terms, these symbols. We've activated color, where now in certain contexts, if it's a political year, you see red and blue, you already know, you pick a side. And the same thing, happened in Jim Crow laws when it was, black and white, that segregation, that separation of human beings, of society, to divide and conquer. And it kind of just, when I realized that it was also happening within fine art, within abstraction, this non-objective, genre that's supposed to be, very open, and what you see is what you get.
Yeah.
That these artists were kind of reinforcing this agenda, especially around the color black. When Ed Reinhardt would describe his black paintings, which we know are blue, as these voids, these vacuums, as these empty spaces, and there would be, other artists. I remember I was reading an interview between Ed Reinhardt and Cecil Taylor, where they were kind of debating the subject matter of the color black. And Cecil Taylor said, when I think of the color black, I think of Harlem on Sunday. I think of my mother's hands. And I feel like for black people, especially through the civil rights movement, when Martin Luther King Jr. was saying, I'm black and I'm proud, I'm black and I'm beautiful. He was not only speaking to, the racist Jim Crows, he was also speaking to Ed Reinhardt. He was also speaking to Malevich, he's also speaking to Paul below. And so for me, being someone who's going to interact with this history, a participant in abstract painting and the history of monochromatic painting, I felt like within my work, to some degree, I have to address that. Because I'm a black man in America, and no one ever lets me forget that.
You can say that again.
So I, in some ways, I have to look to my work as this form of, self-therapy to kind of work through these issues.
Yeah, and so to speak a little bit more on your childhood, you grew up in a religious family where your mom was a minister, and you approach color in ways that I think about like someone like James Turrell, who grew up in a Quaker family. James Turrell is an artist that I love. He uses his Quaker background to bring us closer to the sublime, and so I'm curious to know how your religious or spiritual experiences have informed your approaches to color.
I'm not sure if it's solely my approaches to color, but maybe even my approaches to painting.
How so?
I feel like I'm not a religious person. I feel like I'm a spiritual person.
Okay.
And so yes, from growing up in a church, and my mother being a minister, we kind of had to believe in something that we couldn't touch or see. It was felt. When you walk into a church, you walk into any church on Sunday, if you travel, through Europe and you walk in some of these cathedrals, the architecture, the space, it immediately kind of changes your perspective on the world. And I feel like art does that. When you look at some of these paintings, they're meant to activate this sensibility about yourself that is beyond the physical. And I felt that when I looked at Rothko's Seagram's paintings at the Tate Modern, that there was this undoing inside me that I couldn't really explain. But I feel like art kind of has that power. So whenever I'm making a painting, I'm thinking about these forces and energies and things that exist within our universe, within our world, that are inside of us, that we all feel and interact with every day, that we can't necessarily touch. And I think being an artist and solely working with a visual language, that I try to use the material and visual aspect of art to kind of speak to this unseen energy that's flowing through time and space.
Yeah, and you were talking about how you use plasticine, and I wonder if that's one way of feeling and touching this feeling that's say intangible. It also makes me think about I wonder if you've had a painting that you've cried in front of before. When you talk about Mark Rothko, I read this book called Pictures and Tears by the art historian James Elkins, and he basically tries to understand why people cry in front of paintings, and he goes to the Mark Rothko Chapel, and he reads the entry notes, and he can't figure out why people cry in front of paintings. So I'm curious to know, has there been a painting that has made you cry or have some very visceral emotional reaction?
You're really exposing me. No, actually, at the Tate Modern, when I was in the Seagram's painting, in that room, and I didn't even know I was. It's like I was sitting there for a while. I spent probably 20 minutes in the room, just looking at these paintings, and I didn't realize I was actually, crying until this like elderly woman like passes me a tissue, and I'm like, "What is?" She was like, "I understand," and it was in that moment that I realized that I felt the moisture on my cheeks, and it's something that I don't even know if I could fully explain why. It was just something that touched me to the core. But I feel like it opened up this new space within myself. It was like a cleansing in a way, that or maybe something I was holding on to. It was like 2015. The world was a crazy place then. And I was in grad school, and there was something about the palette, the mood, the energy that was kind of circulating throughout this body of work. And maybe it was something that Rothko himself was going through at the time, that was transcending through the canvas, and speaking to me as an artist who's kind of also operating in that lens. That and I feel like I try to, even within my own work, I put a lot of intention towards empathy within the materials, within the composition. Because for me, I think the process of painting, like I said, is another form of good therapy.
So this question is directed to the two of you. I'm curious to know how improvisation and play, or say planning, come about in your work, especially in your performances.
Well, I guess, so earlier I was really focused on being an object and performing with objects, but I also, conversely, I feel like there's another side to that, which is that I want to be able to regard objects as if they have a life of their own, and I want to be there to listen to what they're saying. So I feel like improvisation happens when I'm able to listen to what some object is saying to me, able to listen to how they want to be interacting, not how they are made to interact, by some manufacturer or some idea of what should be happening. I feel like the moments of improvisation that have stayed with me have emerged in languages that I'm not previously familiar with. And I feel like that's why I'm always, I practice is pretty scattered, or I feel like it's multidisciplinary, and I feel like that's because I spend a lot of time just trying to listen to the things around me, and be a vessel for the kinds of conversations that those things want to be happening.
And so with the stapled works, are those planned? Like the work that's in the gallery right now feels like you had a sketch of how you were going to staple them, because the staples in themselves are very impressionistic. And so I'm curious how you came, I wonder what your process is when you're making these works specifically.
They're not planned. So
Okay.
There's not a sketch or anything. I feel like it is just a kind of immediate response to the visual or sort of tactile manifestations of the staples as a line, or the staples as a cover. And they just kind of build, so it does feel like an ongoing conversation in that way, where the next sentence, is generated from the current sentence, and I'm just kind of there to try to facilitate that sentence coming out.
How about you? How does play, improvisation, or planning appear in your work?
I'm always playing in my studio. Playing, I also relate to experimentation. So I'm always, trying to try out new things to explore, to add into the work, playing with palette, playing with material. You know, the plastiline clay, I was just fucking around, you know. Sorry, Felix. I was just messing around, you know, in my studio. And, you know, always trying to find ways to get myself into trouble or also to problem solve. I feel like I'm constantly problem solving in my studio. And for me, that just keeps the practice interesting. It keeps the work evolving. And, you know, in terms of, you know, strategy, I try to, you know, just learn from my mistakes and just take what I learned and just add that to the next painting. But then also, you know, see if I can, you know, catch myself off guard in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. To kind of go back to the stapled works, I was reading an interview that you have in Art in America where you say that the stapled bodies on these flyers, the ones that you found, lessen the demand of visibility. But you've also, like, so I'm curious to know what choices you make or what's the driving force that compels you to leave out certain parts of these flyers. Because one thing that I've noticed is you leave the hands visible, like you won't staple them. And I wonder if that is because you are trying to signify labor. But this is a question just for the two of you. I kind of jumped off topic there for a minute. I'm curious to hear both of your thoughts on how you work with or against the commodification of Black artists in the art market today, especially when it comes to figurative works. You work primarily in abstraction versus you work in figuration.
Yeah, it's, you know, I feel like I'm always trying to walk that line, you know, of like coming super close to canceling out, you know, my own figurative tendencies, you know, like as close as possible to canceling out those figurative tendencies. So, yeah, you know, because I think there is a sort of demand, you know, clear, like explicit demand for seeing Black people, you know, and having a visual, like, representation of a Black person stand in for some kind of, like, reciprocity or, yeah, just kind of communication on a basic level. So I feel like developing strategies for, like, resisting the demand of showing up, you know, in a figurative way or like in a representational way.
Yeah.
It feels like, you know, it feels like maybe tactically important, you know, or something like in hopefully, you know, I know tactics are usually time sensitive, but I hope that, you know, it can be useful, you know, in a sort of larger discourse of images of Black bodies. You know, it can be like a useful tool for reorienting our relationship to Black bodies.
And you collect the flyers from your neighborhood too, right?
Yeah, they're gathered from the ground, and yeah, so there is this kind of tension between, yeah, wanting to lessen the demand of visibility and still, like, leave room for, like, a collective communication or, like, a collective regard. You know? So I feel like the moments of, like, reprieve, you know, where the staples are absent and there's sort of, like, posturing or gesturing happening are like the moments where I hope there can still be like a connection happening outside of each individual work and like among all of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And among the audience for them.
How about you?
What was it? The commodification of the Black
Yeah. I mean, today we see a huge demand for figurative works in the art market. And so I'm curious to know if that is
ain't
something.
me. That ain't me, Jack. Yeah, I kind of just stuck, I mean, the closest I got was, the Gumby figures, but and that was really, graduate school work, and but I've always been in love with abstraction. That's always been the driving, force behind my work, and I think it never really served a purpose for my practice. So I just stuck to my guns, just stayed in my lane, and people like the work, they like the work. But I think if you're an artist, the last thing you want to be doing is painting for the market. I always paint for myself first, and so that's just where my passion just lied in abstraction, and yeah, I'm in my own lane. Just doing my thing.
Good for you.
Yeah.
So I want to transition a little bit by turning to Bernard, and I would love to hear Bernard talk to us about how he came to know these two artists here today. Hi, Bernard.
Bernard Lumpkin, everyone. Oh.
It wouldn't be complete if I didn't trip on my way up. Wow, it's great to be up here. I was so enwrapped in my phone because I was taking notes on what you guys were talking about. Wilmer and Alteronce are two artists whom I know actually pretty well. The kind of knowledge and dialogue and conversation that gave birth to this book and this exhibition. The book and the exhibition are really a gathering of voices, conversations that I've had over the years with artists, with curators, with educators, with other collectors. And I kind of wanted to capture that and share it with all of you, for instance. So that's what Young, Gifted, and Black is about. So your being present tonight for this conversation is part of what I hope you all will experience with this exhibition and this book. And, we sort of met each other and developed a dialogue through, being in New York and sort of in the art capitals of the country, and at art fairs and museums and galleries, which I think is wonderful and important. Walking around Lehigh today, I noticed some really amazing engineering buildings, and I know that's such a big part of the program here. There's that big glass see-through building where you could see the main boiler, and so it kind of gave me a sense of this is what this place is about, and it celebrates that, and it shares it, and it makes it visible, and it makes you curious. You see it and you want to learn more. So a lot of what I feel grateful for is that I've been able to sort of do the same with these artists and their work by sharing this platform, this stage, which is the university, with an audience that might not otherwise get to hear from you guys and meet you and encounter your work and experience the work, whether it results in tears, that was so great, or laughter or joy, or makes you feel uncomfortable, or makes you look at yourself differently, or your family differently, or your friends. Whatever encounter you have with each artist's work in this exhibition, that's, if you have an encounter, if you have an experience, if you have a moment, and whether you share that with anyone else or not, you will always have that moment. And so that's what I hope you all will have the opportunity to experience. And I feel like the exhibition and the work and the art wouldn't be complete without an audience. For many, art collecting is sort of a private, personal endeavor. Collectors aren't supposed to really share information because that's privileged information, and that's sort of how you build a strong collection, is by getting things that other people don't get or getting to them before other people get them, which is all fine and true. But for me, building this collection and then sharing it with the world has been about sort of, demystifying all of that, because I built it by having many conversations. And it wasn't exactly a conversation with an art advisor. An art advisor is someone whom a patron or collector hires to help them access works of art or get in touch with an artist or a gallery. But I work with many art advisors, not those kind necessarily, but with the curators, with other artists, with other collectors. In other words, there are always people advising me because I'm learning, and for me, collecting art is also an intellectual endeavor. My parents were both teachers. My father was a scientist, a physicist, who was good at math, so that's why he pursued physics. But for me, it was very much about, I forgot where I was going with that, but it was building a kind of, taking what I've learned by looking at art, by reading about it, by studying it, by talking to people, and then sort of coming up with a vision that felt authentic to me. So oftentimes when you're an art collector, people say, you should buy with your eyes, not your ears. So you should be building your collection and making decisions based on, something you want to do or accomplish, or something you want your collection to be, not because it has such and such best, quote unquote, best names or best works of the moment. So for me, the most interesting art collections are those which tell a story in some way, either about a medium, like someone who focuses on photography. I love going to someone's house and you just see photographs from different eras, different practitioners, different kinds of photography. Or sometimes it can be based on a period. You're interested in abstract expressionism, something which Alteronce talked about, or performance art, which Wilmer talked about. So you get to understand deeply what performance is about and what abstraction is about. Other times collectors build collections based on something more personal, a family story or point of view. And for me, I think that was what resonated for me, thinking about my father, who was African American, thinking about my mother, who came from Morocco. She was a Sephardic Jew from Morocco. My experience growing up in a family where French and Spanish and English were spoken, a mixed race family, a mixed sort of cultural, linguistic family. And for me, the conversations I was having with artists like Alteronce and with Wilmer inspired my own thinking of my heritage and how I could better understand myself and answer questions that I had about my own upbringing. And also now that I have children of my own with my husband Carmine, we are raising Lucy, Felix, and Zachary in a home full of art, which for me is almost like having a home full of family photographs. In each of these works of art, sculptures, paintings, photographs, I feel like there's something that the children can learn about themselves, about their family, about the world around them, and as they grow up, they will learn different things in the same way that when you stand in front of a painting at age 14, it means different things to you when you stand in front of it at age 30, or different parts of your life, different stages of life. Art continues to teach. It teaches you, and it will teach you again and again and again if you let it. So those are some of the reasons why I'm here tonight. And I think, Denny, you asked me
how you came to know Wilmer and
Alteronce and Wilmer. Yeah, sorry.
That's how we
That was kind of the philosophical answer. I have, so specifically, and you guys will kind of fill in the blanks or can chime in too, but so Alteronce first, one of the ways in which I support artists is by supporting art schools. It's an early point in artists' career, and I feel, being the child of educators, that supporting education is important. And so the Yale School of Art is where I first met Alteronce, doing studio visits. And I remember so clearly the anecdote you told about the melting the plasticine, the little cute strips or blocks.
Yeah, it's like a brick of clay.
Yeah, like a brick, right.
And like a slow cooker.
In a slow cooker. I remember standing next to you in your studio, like looking at that slow cooker. I mean, you walk into many painters' studios, which is where Alteronce's studio was, and you see the traditional tools and materials. You see the acrylic, you see the oils, you see the gesso, you see the brushes. And then in Alteronce's studio, I just remember seeing that crock pot in the middle with the plasticine. So that is where our conversation started. And it also, speaking with Alteronce at that moment of his career, which he talked about, the important sort of revelations and discoveries that he learned in school, either at school or while traveling in the summer between your first and second year. And I, as a patron, wanted to support that. I wanted to support that learning process. Before an artist, enters the professional sphere, they should get as much experience and knowledge as possible, and I wanted to support that. So that's also how our patron-artist relationship began. So with Wilmer, I feel like I remember was our first meeting at Jeffrey Deitch's gallery?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, and I can talk about that, but I wanted to ask, who was it who connected us? Do you remember who?
I feel like somebody from the Studio Museum.
Yeah.
Very, very vaguely. I
Right.
can't place it exactly, but yeah, I think that's how I learned of you at least.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, it doesn't matter who that specific person was, but the point, which gets back to what I said at the top, was the connection. So I wanted to meet Wilmer. I had seen his work, and I wanted to understand it better. And I had heard about your performances, the Henry Box Brown, which is like something which seems to come up again and again when talking about performance or when people are discussing performance. And so it was a sort of seminal, important work, and I wanted to learn more about the person who made that work. So I must have asked a curator or someone I'm on the board of trustees of the Studio Museum, and this is something that I always tell collectors who are starting out, which is, in order to build a better collection, you should join a museum. Build a community around what you do. Surround yourself with people who are interested in art and supporting artists. So thanks to those relationships, I was able to connect with Wilmer, and we met at a gallery in downtown in New York, and I just remember a very long conversation about your work, and those are the kinds of conversations that lead to projects like this. And so yes, and the great thing is that you have these initial conversations and they then blossom and grow and evolve as the artist grows and blossoms and evolves. And if you're lucky, I think that's one of the joys of supporting living artists, obviously. You can't have those kinds of conversations when the artist isn't alive. But when they're younger as well, emerging artists, the young and the young gifted and black, you really can experience, you grow with the artist, you grow with them professionally, and you also build a community along the way of friendship, shared passions, conversation, and dialogue, and that's why we're here tonight.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
We're doing Q&A. We're doing Q&A.
Join you up here. Unfortunately, time is, just runs too quickly, and this was such a rich and wonderful conversation. Thank you for the artists and for Denny for facilitating a wonderful conversation. And Bernard, thank you for your input and for sharing with us how you have built this collection and why it is so meaningful, and it means a lot to us as we're learning from it here in the university. I hope you will all join us for a public reception. We have lots of food. You have to see the work in person. It is just exquisite, and spend time with it. So come down the hall, have some food with us, meet the artists, bring your questions, and they'll be there to answer them for you. And Bernard, thank you.